Chemicals pouring across a coastline, fireworks and lithium batteries drifting around the Pacific, and containers full of explosive chemicals washing up on beaches. These are abandoned shipping containers found in the ocean with terrifying contents. When people talk about disasters at sea, most of us think oil spills or storms. The Express Pearl was way darker than that though. In May 2021, this cargo ship caught fire just off the coast of Sri Lanka, and the flames hit a bunch of containers carrying nitric acid and other industrial chemicals. When those containers ruptured, they basically turned the coastline into a chemical soup. There were also plastic pellets, nearly 1,700 tons of them. Tiny white plastic beads covering the beaches that started getting eaten by animals. The ship burned for nearly 2 weeks, and the stuff that poured out of those broken containers left dead fish and turtles and miles of coastline covered in toxic debris. The container spill was so bad it's still considered one of the worst environmental disasters in Sri Lanka's history. If you've ever seen footage of a cargo ship getting rocked by a storm, well, multiply that chaos by 1,000 and you'll get the one Apus incident. In November of 2020, this massive ship was crossing the Pacific when it hit weather so bad that almost 2,000 containers were ripped off the deck. Investigators found the storm created what's called parametric rolling, which is just a fancy way of saying the ship was getting whipped side to side. The sideways motion snapped container stacks, and it's one of the largest cargo losses ever recorded. And it wasn't just random household stuff. The official cargo list showed containers holding fireworks, lithium batteries, ethanol, and a bunch of other things you just really don't want drifting around the ocean or washing up on a beach. Some containers split open when they hit the water, and debris started washing up on shorelines weeks later, everything from packaging material to consumer goods, but people were also warned that some boxes contain dangerous goods that could explode or leak. And since these containers don't float forever, a lot of them eventually sink, which creates this long-lasting underwater hazard. I mean, imagine a metal box full of fireworks sitting on the seafloor slowly corroding. The MSC Zoe incident. In January 2019, this huge container ship was hit by strong winds and rough waves while traveling near the Netherlands. The ship listed hard enough to drop hundreds of containers into the sea. Most of the stuff that washed up looked, random. Shoes, toys, TVs. It looked like Walmart threw up all over the beach. But Dutch authorities pointed out that several missing containers were carrying organic peroxides. If you've never heard that term, these are chemicals that can ignite or explode if they're exposed to heat or friction. It was only a matter of time before something really bad was going to happen. Search teams were told not to crack open any damaged containers because they weren't sure which ones held the dangerous stuff. They had to treat every unidentified box like a potential explosive. Volunteers showed up to assist in the cleanup, but the authorities kept warning them that not everything in the water was harmless. Luckily though, nobody was hurt. The ZIM Kingston disaster happened right off the coast of British Columbia in October 2021, and it turned the coastline into a weird mix of burnt cargo and hazardous materials. There were also tons of containers that vanished into the water. The ship got hit by rough seas and ended up releasing 109 containers overboard. Then, to make things even worse, one of the damaged containers left on the ship. It caught fire. That container held potassium amyl xanthate, a chemical used in mining that becomes dangerous when exposed to water or heat. So as the fire burned, crews were stuck trying to cool parts of the ship without spreading the chemicals further. Meanwhile, the lost containers drifted off and started washing debris onto Vancouver Island, everything from fridges to kids' toys. Beaches were suddenly covered in insulation foam and broken packaging, and again, not all the containers were found. Some sank, and several of them were listed as dangerous goods on the manifest. Back in February 2014, the Svendborg Maersk was sailing through the Bay of Biscay off the western coast of France and northern coast of Spain when it hit a brutal storm, losing 517 containers in a single night. For weeks afterward, random containers from the ship kept popping up in the most unexpected places, but the wildest one showed up on a beach in Devon, England. Folks walking along the beach noticed this huge metal box that had washed onto the sand. The box held somewhere between 11 and 14 million cigarettes, all packaged and intact. Police cordoned off the area before anyone was able to haul them out of there. I mean, what a score. You could have a pretty solid side hustle selling off those boxes. Customs officers had to show up immediately because the container technically counted as a massive tobacco seizure. In June 2013, this enormous container ship called the MOL Comfort literally split in half during rough seas in the Indian Ocean. The two sections drifted for days before the stern sank first, then the bow section caught fire and sank as well. The ship was carrying more than 4,300 containers, and almost all of them went down with it. The ocean floor ended up with thousands of sealed containers full of everything from electronics to chemicals to industrial goods. It was also confirmed that some of the containers held hazardous materials, but once the wreck sank below several thousand meters, nobody could reach them anymore, so they're just sitting down there, slowly rotting away, leaking who knows what into the water. The breakup also caused a massive slick of oil, fuel, and burnt cargo that drifted across the area. Salvage teams tried to recover whatever they could, but between the fire, the waves, and the depth, most of the containers were never seen again. In October 2011, the MV Rena ran aground off the coast of New Zealand. The hull was torn open, tons of oil was spilled into the water, and dozens of containers were sent tumbling overboard. It was one of the worst maritime pollution events in the history of New Zealand, and part of the panic came from specific containers carrying, you guessed it, hazardous stuff. Some held alkyl sulfonic acids. Others contained cryolite, which can cause serious chemical burns, and when the containers broke apart, their contents mixed with the fuel oil already leaking from the ship. That meant volunteers helping with the cleanup weren't just dealing with a regular spill. They had to watch out for patches of industrial chemicals drifting around. Some containers washed up intact, but others had ruptured and scattered debris across the shoreline, including milk powder, plastics, and industrial cargo. The ship eventually broke apart, and salvage crews had to literally cut sections off and lift them piece by piece. Even years later, divers still find parts of containers wedged into the reef, and basically turn the place into one giant contamination site. Most shipping container stories end on a beach. This one ended 1,300 meters underwater. In 2004, the Med Taipei lost a bunch of containers during a storm near Monterey Bay. But decades later, researchers exploring the deep seafloor came across one of them, and nobody knew exactly what was in it. All they knew was that it was this sealed steel box, slowly being taken over by sea life. It basically turned into an artificial reef. Fish, anemones, and weird deep ocean creatures were living all over it. But the container was still sealed. The contents were slowly leaking into the ecosystem. Even normal consumer cargo becomes dangerous when it breaks down at that depth. Plastic, metals, and adhesives, they all react differently without sunlight or oxygen. In February 2024, the MV President Eisenhower was sailing off the coast of California when about 24 containers were knocked overboard. Then debris started washing up in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. One of the containers burst open and spilled all these waterlogged cotton bales across the ocean. I mean, you wouldn't think cotton would be super scary, but these were massive, rotting blocks. The bales were heavy enough to damage boats, and animals could easily get trapped in them. Crews had to collect them one by one. The Coast Guard warned boaters to stay away because hitting one could punch a hole right through a hull. Even the intact containers were considered hazardous just by being loose in the sanctuary. It took weeks to track them down. Because cotton absorbs water, the spilled bales kept expanding and tearing apart, creating these long strings of fiber tangled through the ocean. In March 2019, the Grande America caught fire in the Bay of Biscay and eventually sank, taking entire cars, chemicals, and 365 containers with it. At least 45 of those containers were hazardous. That list included hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, aerosols, fungicides, other industrial chemicals that became toxic the moment they hit seawater. When the ship went under, the mess it left behind started drifting toward shore. The water was filled with burning cargo and patches of fuel, and French cleanup crews had to follow those oily chemical trails for days as they floated closer to the coast. Containers ruptured underwater, some floated long enough to spill debris across beaches, including burnt car parts and melted plastics. Fire itself was bad, but the aftermath was worse. The cleanup took months. Even then, not every container was recovered. That's been the video for today, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next one.